Hey everybody, it's your boys again, the Mad Sopranos men, at it again for episode number 2 in our ongoing
Mhm.
series comparing Mad Men and Sopranos. Michael, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Chris Brodhead. How are you?
I'm great. I'm about to head to Florida for Thanksgiving.
Yeah. I am staying here close in Northern Kentucky. We're not going anywhere. Thankfully, I don't have to drive to Detroit to visit my wife's in-laws. So we got a free easy pass for once for Thanksgiving. And you're headed down to Florida to see the fam?
Yep. Gonna see my mom and my brother and his wife and the kiddos, so it'll be a good time. What
Cool.
let's kick it off, man. What do you got on your notes there?
Yeah. So I know that we both listen to different kinds of commentary. You listen to the commentary on the Mad Men episode. Since there isn't a running commentary for every Sopranos episode, even on the DVDs, I went over and listened to the Michael Imperioli, Steve Sharippa podcast, where they go episode by episode, kind of like we are.
Mm,
And just I had a couple quick notes right off the top that I really didn't find a place in the plot line, but I thought were interesting. So the episode 2 is shot 10 months after the original was shot, in August of '97,
mm,
and Imperioli talks about how it was kinda like, just walking down the street and hanging out with your friends, that it was less like a job than anything he's ever worked on before, and even early on in, like, episode 2, you could start to get a sense for that even though, it hadn't become anything yet. The crew themselves, and especially the actors, were all very close. That was really interesting. Imperioli said he was unsure about the show, but happy to have steady work for the next, like, 9 months, and how the production was a little bit different in the sense that they felt like they were making almost a mini movie every 2 weeks instead of just making like a TV show. And he said that by the end of the series, each episode took almost a month. That it
mm.
starts off at 10 days, and then by season 6, season 7, or 6B, if you want to call it that, that each episode is taking nearly a month. So the production grows. I think one thing you and I are going to talk about here is how much I feel each episode feels a lot bigger than the pilot, not just in terms of production value, but also in story. And as we've talked about, how much more deep and nuanced both of these shows get as they progress forward, I thought that was a really good indicator of that being true, that production now is multiplying um in size as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely jarring going back and forth from Sopranos to Mad Men because Mad Men is just from the start like a well-oiled machine. It's just like
Mhm.
everything looks and feels and sounds perfect. And Sopranos, I being the weirdo having only seen like the last 2 seasons and going back and watching this, it looks like it feels like I'm watching like Tarantino's first movie. Like
Yeah.
it's really rough around the edges. There's it's low production value. The kind of other actor, like not the main actors, are terrible.
Yes.
And just
I actually have a note in well, hold on. I have a note in here to piggyback on that. There's one really bad actress in the Mad Men episode, but I won't interrupt you. Go right ahead.
um so it's just you I my assumption is Matt Weiner, you know, learned from their early uh mistakes. I don't know if they're mistakes, but they're just like they're not as
Just the growing
refined.
pains.
Yeah.
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 So
He had more of a complete idea how to execute his vision by the time he got to Mad Men after
mhm.
spending so much time, I think, on The Sopranos.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
no, I think you're right about that. The one thing we talked about, especially in the first episode, but also the idea of this podcast itself, was to talk about what themes and stuff we notice each show doing, and see if they're kind of mirroring each other. And I think for me, for both of these episodes, the theme is expansion. Each episode seems so much bigger than, like I said, than the pilots. We get more and more characters, we get more and more stuff going on. Their worlds get so much bigger from episode 1 to episode 2. That's the real big theme for me as we kind of go into these plots here.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, they're just kinda peeling back layers,
Yeah.
and
Yep,
we're
absolutely.
exploring this world. For some reason, I always compare, world building to, like, Grand Theft Auto 3. It's like
Mhm.
we're just exploring the world that they've presented to us.
Yeah, and each episode you kind of get, a little further in that world. Like, you
Yeah.
start off,
Yeah.
uh for me, I'm thinking of, like, San you start off, like, on the block and just in, like, your own little hood, and you're going to war with everyone around you, but then
Mhm.
each level and each, kind of next journey, next narrative takes you beyond further, and then by the end, the world is just absolutely huge. Um, do you wanna Oh, here's another interesting thing that I found. So Don spends most of this episode dealing with his wife and eventually having to put her into therapy. Tony spends most of this episode dealing with his mom and having to put her into a home. So each of them are dealing with the emotional females in their life and are struggling with
Uh,
how to deal with both of them.
mhm.
Um,
I
I have
will
a question for
say
you.
oh, yeah, go ahead.
No, go right ahead. Go right ahead because my
Okay.
my next thing's a little bit longer.
Yeah, yeah. So, one thing I love about, uh, Mad Men, it is just like, jarring, like, bucket of cold water to Don's face, like, every time he comes home. Like, he just comes
Yeah,
from a
yeah,
literal fucking war zone at work where
yeah,
he's, like, barely hanging on, and then he comes home where he's like, "Oh, thank God, my loving wife and children," and she's like her hair's on fire and the kids are, like, covered in shit or something, and he's like,
yeah,
"Jesus Christ, like, can't I
yeah.
just can't I just, like, pay for this and come home and everything's fine?" Like, why do I have to fix
As
everything here too?
as Tony says in a later episode, which I quote all the time, "Can I come home to a peaceful house one goddamned night? Like, just once. Can I hold it together here?" Um, this is something that I know Matt Weiner talks about later on in some commentary, but also in the series itself. That Betty is a child. Like,
Mm.
she is written as a child. How she reacts to things is like that of a child.
That's a
Um,
real thing that happens. My one of my ex-girlfriends, I told my therapist about her mom, and my therapist was like, "Oh, she's a child queen." And
yeah,
it's like an actual phenomenon where like the person they kind of just like stop developing after like, some young age and they're,
mhm,
40, 50, 60, but they have the reactions and a large part of their mind is like of a child.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that actually does happen.
And that is Betty. There's one point in a later episode where she gets mad at Don for, him coming home and being frustrated that things are in chaos, and her response is basically, "I'm here outnumbered with them all day." I've never been with my 2 girls and felt outnumbered, if that makes sense. Like, that's not even, like, my frame of reference to it,
Yeah. Yeah, they're
you
not
know?
your intellectual
Yeah,
equals.
exactly. We aren't on the same plane here. That's not the conversation that's happening.
Yeah.
But that's not the relationship we have. But Betty says that she even subconsciously views herself as that. I have a quick question for you about just overall plot development and structure.
Let me,
So,
throw one more comment into that, and I
yeah,
think that plays into, like, Don's, uh, like, fake world that he not only lives in, but sells as well. It's like he's got this picture perfect family, like, beautiful wife, beautiful house, beautiful kids, and his wife is just an empty, nothing. Like,
yeah,
she looks great, but it's like a car with, like, a busted engine. It's like a Ferrari
yes.
with, like, you know, 2 of the 2 of the cylinders are exploded.
There's a scene in this episode where hold on, let me find which one it is. It's towards the end. It's after she's gone to therapy. Dawn comes home. She's had her wreck. They have a conversation in the kitchen in the dining room, and Betty talks about the wreck she just had that morning, and what if something had happened to Sally, and what if she had been like scarred up and had to live, and she goes on this long diatribe of
Yeah.
what if she had gotten scarred and then she lives and dies alone, and you see Betty go down this path, which
Mhm.
is almost Livia Soprano-esque, like taking just the worst possible ending of everything, and she's going through this emotion, and they keep cutting back to Dawn a couple times, and I almost screen grabbed it because Dawn is just like, where is this coming from? Just this abject look of horror on his face of how
Yeah.
do we get from you had a slight fender bender in your car and everyone's fine to this? How did we get here in 35 seconds? I'm gonna have to go
Yeah.
back and take that screen grab because Don is just like, he's like, what am I supposed to do with this?
Well, and also the fact that a scar on Sally's face would deem her 0 value as
Unworthy
well
of anything.
is incredibly telling on Betty's character, like, the only thing that matters is looks, and
Yes.
to
Yeah.
some extent, Don agrees with her because he's just like, "Alright, cool, like, this
Mhm.
she looks perfect on my arm.
Yeah.
Let's check mark,
Yeah.
complete."
Yes. And I think that even resonates in the opening scene where Don and Betty are out to dinner with Roger and his wife. And my first thought is, after we end episode 1 with learning that Don has a family, now
Yeah,
we open with him sitting next to his wife. We finally learn her name. We finally hear her speak. But then also on the flip side of that, we also see that, oh, Roger has a wife too. Like Roger has, we didn't hear anything about that in episode 1.
yeah,
Um, but even in that entire sequence, you know, Betty's Betty's just kind of there. She's just there, and she's knocking down drinks, and she has a small little comment here and there. But getting back to what you said about there's looks and not much else there, that's prevalent in the first episode, and of a lot of the stuff we see Sally go through throughout the series. Like, I mean, as a young girl, how would you develop with your mom looking like that? And I mean, like,
mhm,
looking like Grace Kelly, looking like a supermodel walked off the screen into your family. As a little
mm,
girl, how do you almost live in that shadow? And I
yeah.
think that's something interesting that um, they do a good job with. Before we go any further, I have a question for you about um, just basic plot development and plot
Let me,
structure.
I
Yeah.
got one, comment for that. So, spoilers, I think that this development of Betty and how, looks are really the only thing that she's ever been praised for or held a
Mhm.
value for, like, just comes back at the end of the show, like, perfect. Like, it always I was always like, "Oh, that's so interesting that Betty wanted no cancer treatment whatsoever." She was just
Yeah.
like, "Nope, this is it. I'm just gonna die." And it's like, she saw the writing on the wall. It was like, "It's all downhill from here. Like, I'll never be as beautiful as I was, so might as well just this is great." Like, you could
Now
read that as, like, she's happy that this is happening.
now I have an excuse to kinda check out.
Yeah.
Like, I can, leave on a high note, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word, before I
No
become this old, wrinkled woman.
Yeah, no one will see me age. I'll
Yeah,
just and I I don't have to I have, a way out. I have
mhm.
a way to avoid that, which is
And
the
and getting
perfect
and getting
arc.
and getting back to another favorite, quote and topic of ours, you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Yeah.
So, you can be like, I can check out as a parent, I did okay, and do this or that. The longer I go and the longer this goes, the more opportunity to fail there is, and you can just kinda go out on top, or at least,
Yeah.
not at the bottom, especially
Yeah.
as Betty sees that. I think that's a really interesting point about that. She sees that as her out
Yeah.
with her. And I
And,
think one thing, let's go
yeah, go
let's
ahead.
go ahead and get out in front of this. I don't think we need to do spoiler alerts. These shows have been done for 10 plus years, and we're connecting a lot of dots on this. and trying to make the most autistic Sopranos Mad Men podcast show ever made. So let's just throw that out the
Listen,
window.
there's some stiff competition for that most autistic here, so
Yeah,
but
we're
we're
making a
aiming for
run.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
we're
going
making
for
a
it.
run here.
One
Um,
one one comment from the commentary, that was extremely meta to what you were just referring to. There was a scene where Betty's just like laying on the bed, and
yeah,
Matt Weiner's like, "Yeah, we literally can't get anything but a perfect shot of January Jones." Like he's like,
yeah.
"She's just magnificent," and I was like, "That's
There's
so
no angle
fucking
that
meta."
doesn't work. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Like I don't even think he realized how meta he was being.
yeah. That's really good. I like that. And that's, that goes back to Don and the life that he's crafted, that his professional life and this, the Don Draper that Dick Whitman builds. She fits perfectly um in that role.
Like from
Um
the
all right.
outside. Yeah, from a
Yeah, yeah,
shallow
yeah.
perspective.
Mhm. As Roger puts it later on in the series, when he's talking to it's either his wife or his next wife about Don and Betty, and he's like, "They look like the couple on top of our wedding cake."
Mhm,
And I thought that was a good, this little perfect thing that's almost never meant to be that perfect. Oh,
mhm.
that's what they are
Yeah.
on the surface.
And I think you could argue that is the entire point of the show. Like it's putting this ideal couple that everyone seems to hate themselves compared to, and just like, look at how fucked up they are. Like this is who you think the ideal couple is. Like, here's a
Yeah.
dose of reality.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, Getting back to, oh, sorry. Okay. So my point about, I want to talk about the plot structure and for both of these episodes. So for the uninitiated out there, if you're just passing through, shows always have like an A plot and a B plot, maybe a C plot and a D plot. Um, Chris, if I were to ask you, what is the A plot for both of these episodes? And what is the B plot and what is the C plot? Because this took me kind of a few minutes to work through.
Oh, I have no idea. You lay it
Yeah.
on me.
Well,
What do you think?
it's interesting because both episodes are kind of almost nebulous in that I think the A plot for both is just Tony and Don living their life, and we're seeing more of it. And it's not Tony has to deal with Livia, and he has to deal with Junior. Those are his two main um,
Antagonists.
antagonists and drives in in the second episode.
Mhm.
Both of those things come together, but they both also exist separate, and it's what he's dealing with. Over on Mad Men, Don is dealing with work and he's dealing with Betty at home. And both of those things at times are nebulous and he is dealing with both of them at the same time, but there is not like a single thing that each main character is focused on in these second episodes. It's almost like they're trying to show us the multiple fronts our protagonists are fighting wars on at each time. And
Mm.
I thought that was interesting that they each kind of follow that same path. For the B plots on The Sopranos, I have Christopher and his interactions with the Comley truck and his junkie friend Brandon. Over on Mad Men, my B plot is Peggy
Had
continues to
have you
go.
ever seen a character, like, wearing a brighter red shirt than his buddy Brandon? You're like, first of all, this guy, he just sucks as an actor.
Yes, yeah, he's awful. He's awful.
And second of all, he couldn't be less memorable. Like, god
No,
damn, this guy can't die fast enough.
well, he's memorable in the sense that like the junkie who assaults you outside of Target is memorable and just how he looks and he's just like the biggest scumbag in the entire world on a show like The Sopranos where they have countless characters who are brutal people and murderers and rapists and they all come across more interesting and likable than Brendan Filone. Like, you just want that guy fucking dead the second, like, he starts coming on screen. And that's the, that's gotta be a clear choice that they made.
Yeah,
But no, that guy's
and
worth.
then, hopping ahead a bit, when he actually does, get his just rewards, the fake dead body they use, I was like, "Why would you even show that?" It
Yeah,
looked like dog shit.
yeah, just
That's a
just look.
mannequin with, like, some weird plastic on it. I was
I
like,
know.
"That looks terrible. Why are you showing us this?"
Just look, just put the guy who played Brendan back in the tub for a few shots, keep the door, like, closed so you don't actually see it as the audience, and then just go
Yeah,
from there. Like, don't.
yeah,
Or if you're stuck with the mannequin and you don't have the actor, just keep the door shut. Just keep the door shut, or, like, shoot it so where you, like, see Brendan's knee and then, like, walk in the door. So you
yeah,
don't have to, like I said, you don't have to see that whole entire, like, fake bad body.
yeah,
Um, that
yeah.
reminds me about, bad actors. Uh, there's a point in Mad Men where Peggy and Joan go into the bathroom, and there's a lady crying in there. That is the worst fake crying I've ever seen on camera. It's just this, there's no rhythm to it, there's no nothing, it's just this woman going while, like, while Peggy walks behind her,
She's like a
and they
shitty NPC in,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
gangster
yes.
game.
She's like an NPC in, like, the N64 Zelda, who's literally only has, like,
Yeah,
5 sprites to her animation and just goes
yeah.
through all 5 of those, and when you talk to her, she'll stop for a second, but then she'll just go right back to the thing. That was something that really that stood out to me.
Yeah.
But, oh,
Oh, hey, one quick thing. I wonder if there's like because that seems to be a trope in gangster movies is killing someone in a bathtub.
mhm,
I realized
yeah,
saying that I'm like, oh, I've seen that in, I don't know, at least half a dozen movies.
it's in Godfather, famously, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
um,
yeah. I wonder if there's like a top
that's
10 bathtub
top
murders.
10 bathtub murders. Yeah,
My number one would be Road to Perdition. 'Cause they barely showed it, and then, like, the door, like, swung and, like, the mirror just, like, you glimpsed it, and you're like, "Oh, fuck," and then
yeah,
it cut.
yeah, I gotta see that again. I haven't seen that in a
That's
long
a
time. I remember really
that's a
liking that.
underrated masterpiece in
Yeah,
my opinion. The
I
last
remember
good
seeing
Tom Hanks movie.
I remember seeing that with my dad and really liking it.
Yeah.
And then for the C plot, I have Paulie and Pussy, go on the hunt for the teacher's car, and then over on Mad Men, Betty and just her existence and establishing something in the home.
Mhm.
But I thought it was interesting, but, like, the A plot on both of these is just our protagonists fighting multiple fronts
Mhm.
and not knowing where to go and not knowing what's next. Another interesting thought was the episode of The Sopranos is called 46 Long. It's in reference to a jacket size. And then while there's a scene in Mad Men while they're in a restaurant for lunch, uh, Peggy, Joan, and the account boys, one of them makes a comment to a suit size and says 46 long. And I wonder if that was
Hmm.
a purpose. Was that on purpose? I don't know.
Whoa.
Are there any other, autism podcasts out there that wanna discuss this and do a deeper dive?
We'll go toe to toe with any
Yeah,
autism
exactly.
podcast out there.
But, the home, I think, is also a big theme in this one. The episode 2 of The Sopranos ends with Tony standing in Livia's home, and we fade out on him in this empty house. The last scene in the Mad Men episode is of the empty kitchen in the Draper house, and we pan back. So we almost have the exact same shot, except our protagonist isn't in the Mad Men final shot. But
Mhm.
it's a dark element in the home. We pull back, and that's where we fade away. So we we're emphasizing the home, especially in the Mad Men episode where we did not at all. We didn't even know it existed in the pilot.
Yeah. No, I think there's something important about kitchens to both of these shows. It seems that so much character interaction and development
Yeah.
and information is learned in the kitchen.
I I could also argue that it's the one place where Betty thrives is in her
Yeah.
home and keeping the house and fixing meals and keeping the family.
Mhm.
That's that's what she does. And the kitchen and meals and family is consistent throughout The Sopranos. And so
Mm.
many I mean, there's got to be like 50 different YouTube clips about like the top 10 funniest Sopranos dinner scenes or the top 10 things that happened at a Sopranos dinner table. So that's a thing and that carries through. Um,
Mhm.
Another interesting plot between the two is we end up with Betty going to therapy and seeing a therapist, and Don being kind of against it. They're not carrying the entire episode. And over on The Sopranos, clearly therapy playing a giant role. We have, Tony going but keeping it secret. No one else is allowed to know about it, and how that impacts him. So you have therapy also playing a role in both of these characters' lives.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting that both of these shows, I mean, obviously, Sopranos is that's kind of the central story
Yeah.
is just I mean, that's probably how he pitched it. He's like, "Alright, a mob boss goes to therapy." They're like,
Yeah.
"Here's $1 billion. Go make that."
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, therapy features prominently,
Yeah.
um, and I would argue that Don I can't recall him ever going to an actual therapist, but every woman he seduces, is a form of therapy for him or getting the
I feel
love he
I
never got.
I feel like every scene he has with Midge in season 1 is his therapy scene. Like, in this
Yeah.
episode, she even comes home and he's like he's feeling bad about Betty and sitting outside her hallway leaning up against the door, and then he starts talking about Betty, and even though Midge doesn't wanna hear it and sends him off or brings him in, but says like, "I don't wanna hear about her, it makes me feel cruel, blah, 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 blah." But that's his therapy.
Mhm.
His therapy is betting a woman and speaking somewhat freely, or as freely as Don Draper slash Dick Whitman is comfortable doing. But yeah, you're right. That they each have that outlet. It's just that for Don, the woman constantly changes, and Tony has his own constantly changing women, but he never really invests, especially after season 3. He doesn't really invest anything in them, but they're just
Mhm.
they they they,
Well
they drag him down too much.
well, I think both of these characters' major underlying issues are mommy issues,
Yeah,
and that's why Tony chose a female therapist who is Italian in this. She was Jewish in Goodfellas, so
yeah,
that was a little confusing.
yeah. Well, he says in the pilot, I had a choice between uh, an old Jewish man and an Italian broad, so I picked you. What part of the boot are you from, hon?
Yeah.
In my own experience, I've found talking like in therapy with men easier, because with women I'm always like looking at it through the lens of, especially if they're kind of attractive, like, can I make a run at this? Like, what am I? Of course, this is before I've been married, but I've always looked at it through that lens. And for me, I haven't been able to be totally honest in those scenarios because I'm still viewing this as like a woman who I still see as like potential, if that makes sense. So when it came to
Potential for her to
dude,
get stuck in the dryer, maybe?
yeah, and for me, like the last when I moved back here, and I was trying to find a therapist, and it came down to this long list. I was like, I just need a dude. I need a dude. I need a dude to be honest with.
Yeah.
I already got a woman at home that I'm hiding certain truths from. I don't need another one that I go pay more money to.
Yeah. Most of my or all of my therapists have been, female,
Yeah,
I think, 'cause I can relate to Tony and Don's mommy issues. Hey, mom,
Um,
if you're listening.
shout out to our moms, the only people watching this right now. Um, let me see here. I had a couple other little things. Oh yeah, I have this line here about when Tony gets called out in therapy for maybe hating his own mother, and I just wrote, "Well, why not? She's awful and she's old. Like he should hate her." Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
this
they make, they do a really great job of making her, like, very easy to despise. You're just like,
yeah,
"What the fuck? Like, what? Why do you exist?"
yeah, yeah.
Like
And something you and I have talked about for a long time, it was like touched on it a bunch of times before. I can't imagine having an awful parent in my life because I feel like at 18 I would have just moved away to college and changed my number, and no one ever would have seen me ever again. Like if I had awful parents, that's what I would have done. I would have just left. I would have Don Drapered myself
Mm.
and told everyone that I got, oh, I'm going to Ohio State next summer, and then I just went to UCF with you, and no one would have ever seen me ever again. Like if my parents were garbage, that's what I would have done. So when Mad Men came along and there was this character who just this creative guy who just like picked up and left, I was like, I get this. I get it. um, another interesting thing in both episodes, we have yeah, I think Peggy and Chris run parallel because they are our young up and
They're
comers.
the Robin to Batman, I think,
Yeah.
right? Like, aren't they our seat in this story?
Yes, they're our avatar. That
Yeah.
that's there's even a scene in this Mad Men episode where the guy who looks like Orson Welles, he takes Peggy around for a tour of the office. So everybody's at lunch, and he's literally like going from department to department, going, "This is what they do. This is what they do, and here's why we work with them." That's for us as the audience, because
Mm,
before we were just dumped into this office and we know a handful of people, but what is actually everybody doing? That's for us. And it's the same way with Christopher. They're starting out down here, and we they learn more about this world as we learn about this world. For me, it's always the quintessential example of this is Ellen Page in Inception.
mhm,
Like that character knows nothing about the Inception world, and she is our avatar in that film. And Peggy and Chris are our avatars in these worlds too.
mm. Yeah. And I love that Tony, like, wants to kill Christopher, like, every episode, and Don
I
wants to kill Peggy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of Don's Don. Well, here's the difference: is Don wants to kill people that he views as an equal, or people that are viewed as his equal. Like I think of there's in this episode we get our first scene of Don kind of working his magic in a room while they're going through pitches because they do the aerosol. They do it. The creative team comes in and pitches three ideas for the aerosol campaign, and Don's just kind of sitting as they're all very proud of the work that they've done, and Don is just poking holes in their balloon step by step about astronauts and who is this guy? He flies around he wears tinfoil and he shits in his pants. Like, why would I look up to him? What does this connect with me as a salesman or as someone who's purchasing? So Don's ire is reserved for those men. It's designed for Pete. Oh yeah, Pete's not even in this episode.
Mm,
You could argue Pete's the number 2 or 3 in this entire series, and Pete's not even in this episode because he's off on his honeymoon after scoring with Peggy. But Don's ire towards those 3 men that really reminded me of Chris and Tony, and Chris coming in with some half-baked idea, or Chris is famous for not knowing when to shut up. Like, he'll be in scenes, and he'll just keep talking and talking, and he'll always say the wrong thing. He'll always say the wrong thing, and that always draws Tony's ire. And as you said, that always brings him back to I think he wants to murder this guy. Yeah, because he can't shut up. But I really like that scene, and with Don and the boys doing their first creative pitch because it's an indicator of a lot of what's to come. I just really liked it.
Mhm,
I think that's about it for my big notes.
mhm.
Oh, the other thing you talked about, Don and his mom, and even in the very first scene in this second episode, they start probing Don about his parents and his past and who raised you. Did you have a nanny? And he's basically just like, just pretend I didn't exist until like 3 minutes ago. I don't know. I don't know. He won't give him anything whatsoever. And knowing what you know about Don and what comes out about him, I thought that was a really interesting.
It's it
Um,
that's interesting to me that he didn't just lie. Like,
yeah,
he's lied about so much, like, why dance around this thing that makes everyone like, "Oh, that's I'm gonna maybe be so curious about this, I'm gonna look into it and find something that you
yeah.
don't want me to find." Like, why w that
Why
seems
why create a mystery
weird and
when
interesting
you could just
choice.
be like, well, my parent. All Dom would have to do like, well, my parents were farmers. My dad died when I was young. My mom died 15 years ago. The end.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
They'd be like, "Oh, that's boring."
yeah, yeah. I was a farmer. I went off. Take the existence Don already has. Just omit a bunch of stuff and add a layer of gloss to it, and then that becomes your new truth.
Mhm.
And I think the real answer to this, Chris, is why didn't Don do it? Well, because it's a TV show and we have to have a mystery. we have to we have to have these little breadcrumbs dropped throughout as we
So
go.
that's more for the audience than for,
Yeah, I think so.
developing his actual character? Yeah.
I think so, considering it's the first scene in episode 2. Um, you're trying to establish this mystery. You know, the first 2 seasons of this of Mad Men are built on mystery. Who is Don Draper in season 1? What happened to Peggy's child in season 2? And after that, they kind of get away from it. But this is what they're building right now is this mystery. And I bet if we went back and watched a bunch of Hitchcock's, there'd be a couple scenes where it'd be like, well, why did you say that to that person if you weren't just telling it to us? So really interesting stuff. I know you have to get out of here in a few minutes. You have a hard out uh, to hit the road for Thanksgiving. Is there anything else in this episode you wanted to discuss?
I did watch Goodfellas on Saturday. I'm a little ahead of this episode of Sopranos, and there was, I forget which episode, like the 7th or 8th episode. We, like, see Tony's dad in, like, the 50s or 60s or whatever that is. And I was like, "Oh, I love, like, old gangster movies." And I
Yeah,
was like, "We should watch Goodfellas." And, like, watching Goodfellas, with these shows, you're like, "Holy shit," like, Goodfellas was the template for Sopranos. I mean, as we discussed in the first episode, but it's, like, even worse than you can imagine. Um, like Christopher, his name's Spider in Goodfellas, he gets
yeah.
shot in the foot by Tommy, Joe Pesci's character,
New
and
York Giants quarterback Tommy DeVito.
yep, that's the one. He's got a hell of a shot, and, it's like the 8th or 9th or 10th episode of Sopranos, he shoots the donut guy in the foot,
Yeah,
and you're like, that's at least unconscious."
yeah. Well, no, that's done on purpose because the line after that, he's like, "You shot me in the foot," and he goes, "It happens."
Yeah,
That they clearly leaned into that.
okay,
That was supposed to be there. When we get to that episode, I know from my own memory that Imperioli talks about that in the pod on that particular episode. So I'll have a little bit more for you on that one. But no,
cool.
it is the template that it lays it down, especially when so much of Goodfellas concentrates on his family and the fallout of his other family affecting his current family, and that is the heart of The Sopranos. And
Yeah,
it's not, and considering half of the cast of The Sopranos is in Goodfellas, that also just rings in your head when you're watching it. That's funny you mentioned that
yeah.
because I was watching Goodfellas on Saturday night too,
Oh,
but
no shit.
it was on like AMC or something.
Yeah,
That's what I had it
yeah,
on. And for me, um, I feel about Goodfellas the way I feel about some episodes of The Sopranos is that I love Goodfellas when it's early on and they're doing all the robberies and everything's going good and they're just having a good time. I just like hanging out with these criminals. They're having so
Yeah.
much fun. Got money. They don't really care about anything. That's great. And then I feel the same way about The Sopranos too. And then but then the second half of the movie happens, and then the heavier episodes of The Sopranos happens. It's like, oh yeah, oh man, that's a
Ah,
bummer.
the consequences to my actions,
Could I
man.
just have an entire? Could I just have an entire movie where the mobsters just get away with everything and have fun? Because that sounds awesome.
So, I also saw Killers of the Flower Moon, which some say I'm still in the theater watching to this day,
Okay,
and
yeah.
and
You're
I
like Doctor
have
Manhattan. You're constantly in the theater watching Killers of a Flower Moon, no matter
yeah,
where you are.
just forever and
Yeah,
forever and ever. And my take now is like, the reason our greatest auteurs make these super long fucking movies is because they were just they're from a different time and they don't understand you can make a Sopranos, you can make a Mad Men, and 80 hours can feel like 90 minutes, whereas 3.5 hours feels like 90 years.
yeah, yeah.
And
If he had taken Killers of the Flower Moon, well, on Netflix right now, I think they used to have it. I don't know if they do anymore, but they used to have an expanded version of the Hateful Eight,
mhm,
where there was like 4 chapters, they're each about 45 minutes to an hour long. I've watched that 3 or 4 times. I've seen Hateful Eight once with you,
mhm.
like opening weekend at Music Box. And then every other time I wanted to watch it, I was like, "Ah, it's so long." But I can sit down for that 45-minute chunk, and then I can sit down for the other 45-minute chunk. And at the end, I think it's better. And should Killers of the Flower Moon be a 5-hour series? Probably.
Mm.
I How much of it are you losing putting it on a big screen? Having finally seen Oppenheimer, uh, I don't think that would have been done better because just so much of it is big, and I want to see that on a big screen. But the last 30 minutes of Oppenheimer, I was starting to get glossed over. And that just wasn't because I was totally drunk. Like my third beer really hit me like right after the nuke went off. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, everything's starting to blur together, but there's only like 5 minutes left in this movie, right? And then there was just more and more and more of the movie that kept coming. So I
Yeah.
liked it. I loved it. Don't ask me any specifics about the last 30 minutes though, because it was just
Yeah.
totally glossed.
I saw that movie 3 times in theaters, and I'll admit I did struggle with the last hour, but if you see it in true IMAX, like the full ass
Yeah.
IMAX that they only have in, like, a couple, cities, and you take 5 to 10 milligrams of a weed edible, that will be one of the wildest rides of your life.
The closest one of those IMAXs to me is up in Indianapolis. And I almost thought about driving up to go do it.
Dude,
But
it's insanity. Like, the screen is literally wider than it is, or, like, taller than it is wide.
yeah.
I was like, "Am I watching, like, the biggest phone on earth right now?"
Yeah, you're constantly moving. All right. So before this turns into the Nolan podcast, which maybe season 2 of this turns into, uh, maybe we should wrap this up.
We'll compare every Nolan film to every Tarantino film.
Yeah, one by one. That I mean, we can get 12 episodes out of that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Awesome.
awesome. Uh, Chris, thank you so much. Safe travels and safe travels to everybody else out there. And happy Thanksgiving. We'll be back soon with episode 3.
Alright, look forward to it.
All right, man. Good job by you, buddy.
Good job by you.